All right. Okay. In three, in two, and one. What's going on, family? What's going on? What's going down? What's shaking? Welcome to another episode of Nonfiction with Jonathan Soul. So, in Twitter and just in my news feed, I've been following a lot of what's going on with the Ukraine situation. Ukraine and Taiwan, mostly Taiwan. And the one thing that I kind of was thinking about when wanting to approach a podcast about this topic is to use the topic as a point of departure to talk about a broader concept. So here's the simple way to put it: propaganda versus perspective. Propaganda versus perspective. Okay. And I'm going to try to keep this brief. All right. So, what's the first thing? The first thing is certain Russian news outlets have been blocked from America. So, like, for example, I use Telegram. I like Telegram as an app and so forth. It has some security features or whatever. Telegram, for those who don't know, is it's a messaging app, but it has like a social media component to it. Anyway, Russia Today, RT.com, has been blocked in this country. And no matter which VPN I try to use, I can't get it. You know what I'm saying? I can't get it. So you begin to wonder, well, what is America concerned about? We're supposed to be free speech and the whole thing like that. But what you find out is that in order for you to get your population behind a war, which generally nobody wants war, because who gets hurt? It's generally not the rich people, generally speaking. And even if they do get hurt a little bit, guess what? They got money, they can afford to repair themselves. But it's the poor people that get drafted. It's the poor people that got to take up arms. It's the poor people who get their apartments and their houses bombed. So generally speaking, nobody wants war. So if you block certain news outlets, then that means you can kind of control the information that you give your population. And then, of course, if you control that, you control the way they think. So right now, if you look at CNN, Fox, NBC, ABC, Putin is like the supervillain. Putin is like, some comic book villain who just wants to destroy the helpless people of Ukraine. Now, what they don't tell us, and what you would hear if you listen to other media, is one, Putin has, at least for a year, in this particular conflict, has been asking NATO, just promise that you won't make Ukraine part of NATO, because all the NATO nations have, like powerful weapons in their states, in their countries. And since Ukraine, shares a long border with Russia, that means that it could be very dangerous missiles just minutes away from Moscow. So if there was ever a problem, Moscow would not have the chance to defend themselves because the weapons are so close. Now that's not an unreasonable thing to ask. And again, the people who are very emotional, and most of us are, kind of tell your emotions to like sit down for a second. I'm just talking to the brain. In 1962, Russia had missiles in Cuba. And Cuba's several hundred miles away from America, and more than almost 2,000 miles away from Washington, D.C. But once Kennedy found out that there were missiles in Cuba, Kennedy called Khrushchev, I think that was the president of the USSR back then, and said, if you don't get the missiles out of Cuba, it's going to be a problem. And so, they called it the Cuban Missile Crisis, and you can look it up and everything. And long story short, both leaders came to an agreement. One, the missiles taken out of Cuba, and missiles that were in Turkey, which is across the water from the USSR back then, was removed. So they came to a compromise. I think those leaders are a little bit wiser than we are. But that whole Cuban Missile Crisis piece is not being talked about in the American media. But if you listen to some foreign media, they give you a historical context. And so that's where the idea of propaganda versus perspective comes from. When you got propaganda, we're just going to give you one set of facts that we want you to hear. Therefore, you can only really come to one conclusion, which is the conclusion we want you to come to. When you have perspective, I'm going to give you the historical piece. I'm going to give you both sides of the argument, and then you can choose which one makes sense for you. Now, in America, the thing that's interesting is we've been protected by these huge bodies of water on either side. And so some Americans can be very cavalier about, I want to go to war, ha ha ha. It's like, no, you don't, motherfucker. We haven't heard the air sirens go off in the middle of the night saying that planes is coming. We haven't had that in America. Not my generation. I'm 53 years old. I'm sure most of the people listening to me are 40 and below. There's a couple of cats out there who are my age. None of y'all have heard no shit like that if you American born. Now, my people's generation, they've heard that maybe. That's not even true. Nobody bombed America except you talking about the police. Police bombed plenty of people. Moving on. Foreign policy, domestic policy. I've been saying for a while that if you want to understand American foreign policy, look at the way they treat black people. African American people are like a foreign nation, a captive foreign nation inside of America. So what do they do to this wonderful foreign nation that they have? Well, of course, they have economic sanctions. What do you mean, Mr. Soul? You don't have economic sanctions in America. Sure you do. When you make my house less valuable than a white person's house, even though it's the same build, even the same neighborhood, and that's economic sanctions. And you can easily look that up about how African-American people's houses have been devalued. Not only that, get some light here. Not only that, a lot of times we get paid less for the same amount of work. That's economic sanctions. That's economic sanctions. Not only that, a lot of times when the cops stop us, if we don't get brutalized, which is a form of terrorism, a lot of times they'll give you tickets as opposed to letting you slide like they would a white person. That's economic sanctions. There was an article that came out the other day. I believe it was, I'll just say a ride share. One of those people you call up on your little phone and everything, that they charge more in black neighborhoods. That's economic sanctions. Is that something that's come from the government? No, that's something that comes from the culture. That's something that comes from the government, but in the businesses and things of that nature. That's economic sanctions. Then you say, well, what about police brutality? Police brutality is just another form of state-sponsored repression. So one thing you won't hear in the American media is that for 8 years, the Donbass and Lugansk region, the east side of Ukraine, has been terrorized by the Ukrainian government. These are the Russian-speaking, pro-Russia type, friendly Russian type Ukrainian people on that side. And they've been wanting their own little state and everything. The Ukrainian government has been oppressing them people for about 8 years. And so I saw something on Sputnik, and you can find Sputnik, Sputnik, on Telegram. And they mentioned that there was 5,888 complaints to the European World Court. Here, let me see if I can find it real quick while I'm talking here. 5,888. Let me see if, hold on, I got to put a comma in there. Comma 888. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, so this is Sputnik. It says, since 2015, the European Court of Human Rights has not made any decision on the 5,888 complaints filed by the Donbass residents who were injured in shelling. Human rights activist Donetsk Sergei Efremov tells Sputnik. So I found some kind of report on the European World Court, European Court website talking about the abuses, and it sounds a lot like what black people go through in America. So that's what I'm saying. When you understand American foreign policy, particularly toward weaker nations, you got to look at the way African American people are treated. To my knowledge, the first bombing of an American city on U.S. soil was Tulsa. It was the Greenville section of Tulsa, Oklahoma, basically a black neighborhood that was bombed by the white people of that time. And then, of course, in the 80s, the police bombed the home of a organization, a group of people. They were naturalists called Move organization, and they bombed them. I got the book around here somewhere. They bombed them. So when I look at American foreign policy, I think about how African American people are treated. So, and you know that when an African American person is abused by the police, what's the first thing the media does? It puts out their propaganda. They don't show a nice picture of the person. They say, oh, he had a parking ticket in 2017, and oh, he was arrested for shoplifting in a candy bar, and oh, he owed child support. They have all the negative shit about the guy who just got murdered by the cops. They don't talk about the cop's past record of abuse. They don't talk about how many complaints that the cop got. They just talk about all the negative shit that the victim has in their life to dehumanize the person, to make the population okay with that person being murdered. And that's what the U.S. media is doing with this war stuff, this military operation that's going on with Russia and Ukraine. They're not talking about the 8 years that these neo-Nazis, and a lot of them in the government and the military, are straight Nazis. Nazis like Heil Hitler type motherfuckers. They're not talking about that. They're not talking about the fact that the U.S. military is training these devils, giving them weapons, and now the last thing I saw on my news is that that NATO might give these my language, they might give these motherfuckers airplanes. I don't know if Ukraine got airplanes, but I know the NATO countries do. So if NATO is giving airplanes, don't that mean that NATO is getting involved in the... So I think that the leaders that we have now are dumber than the ones back then, at least on the Western side. Because I've been watching the buildup. I've been watching slowly. Putin been putting people there on the border. You know, they didn't talk about how the weapons was coming in. Proxy. What's really happening is America cannot compete like they used to economically. They can't, because they're not spending no money in education. They taking a lot of the computers and the gym and the arts programs out of the schools. They're not pushing STEM, was it science, technology, engineering, and math. They're not doing that. They rather just import from countries who do that. And so the population is getting dumber. And so when you graduate 12 years out of school, the only thing you can do is serve fucking coffee. But those people are easier to control. You can get hype behind those people. You can wave a flag and say America #1, and nobody questions what that means. So the way they figure, said, well, if I can't compete with you straight up, I'm going to trip you up. I'm going to sabotage your situation. And so they'll go to a country, a neighbor who their competition is, in this case, Russia, and they'll fuck with Ukraine, and they'll get rid of the democratically elected president they had in Ukraine, and they'll get an actor comedian elected. You know, this guy's an actor comedian, right? This Lewinsky guy. BBC did a quick thing on it. I give you the super short. He was an actor comedian, not that well known. He was on a TV show where he played a teacher who got upset with the system and ran for president and won. The character was very well received by the Ukrainian people. The TV show was a hit, and the guy got famous. Not too long after that, he ran for president for real. And the thing that was crazy was the journalists kept saying, is this fake? Is this a gag? He was like, no, this is real. I'm really running for president. But the vibration, the impression that he had amongst the people of that teacher character he played was still in the air, and the guy won by a huge margin. Now, I don't know about the Ukraine, but I know in America it costs a lot of money to run for president. So if you're a little known actor, where you get that bread from? Where you get your backing from? So it might not be too far-fetched to say this guy may be a puppet. Maybe a puppet. Because he's not thinking strategically when he's asking NATO to have a no-fly zone over Ukraine. That means shooting down Russian planes. That means World War III. He's not thinking. He's not thinking. But if you're a face man, you don't get paid to think, do you? What's happening is this is what you call a proxy war. In other words, America wants to fuck with Russia, but they can't do it directly because Russia can defend itself. So what they do is they find a middleman to fuck with Russia. And so Russia can't attack directly because that looks bad to the masses, whatever. So Russia is fucking with these people. Same thing with Taiwan. Taiwan and China are the same group of people. In 70 something, I think it was, or 50, whatever, they had a civil war, and the one group broke away and went to Formosa. The island of Formosa is what it's called back then. And the rest of them stayed in mainland China. And then the island people said, we're going to do our own thing. We're going to form our own nation. Once China got strong enough, they're like, I think we want you guys back. So anyway, so there's been like an uneasy peace between them. America can't compete with China like they used to, so what happens? And so all of a sudden now, we're giving them arms and we're sending people. This is the same thing we did with the Ukraine, except people not getting it because we're not getting the education. If we would have got a proper education in history, we would know about proxy wars. We would know about that. So again, propaganda versus perspective. When you have an idea of what's happened in the past, who the winners and losers were, what the outcomes is, when you see that pattern repeat, because people are people. And so we tend to behave there are patterns. And so when you get a proper education, you can peep the patterns. We're not going to get the education in the public school system, so we got to go out and look for it. One of the ways you can look for it is take a topic and get it from one country's perspective and then another country on the opposite side of the globe or the opposite side of the conflict. And I'm going to wrap this up. So in this situation with Ukraine, there's a TV channel, I'm old. There's a YouTube channel called Republic World. It's Indian news. It's like an Indian Al Jazeera. And so look at the American coverage, right? And Al Jazeera has changed, yo. Al Jazeera is like BBC Light nowadays. So let's just say, look at Al Jazeera's coverage. They're going to make Putin to be the devil. And then look at the Indian coverage. They're going to have a different perspective. But the difference is you're going to get the history. And so when you got the history, when you know more facts, then you can make a proper judgment. But at the end of the day, none of us want to go to war. None of us want to pick up arms and go fight somebody we don't know. So who's benefiting from this? It ain't us. Have you seen the price of gas lately? I guess we get some of our gas from Russia. Was that figured into the calculation? But I tell you what, we don't get as much gas from Russia as Germany does, as Europe does, and oil and natural gas. This is going to be one expensive war for the regular people in Europe and in America, apparently. And then the other thing is, when they start these wars, what's the first thing they do? They want to bring in all these refugees. Aren't y'all cutting social service programs in America now? I don't know about England, but I heard that they was trying to fuck with the NHS, the National Healthcare Service. So if y'all fucking with the social services that your rank and file born native people depend on, how can you afford to bring these refugees in? I'll say this real quick. It's a lot of brothers and sisters from Afghanistan here. And hey, look, you made it here. I'm happy for you. You hit the lottery. God bless you and your family. But the American-born Uber riders, a lot of them are sleeping in their cars because they can't afford a mortgage. They're not getting the help that these refugees are getting. They're not getting free room and board. They're not getting money to keep in their pocket. They're not getting vehicles. The Americans is not getting that, but the refugees are. And we supposed to be okay with that? My tax dollars is not going to Americans who's down on their luck, who's having a difficult time transitioning from this post-COVID situation and now war. And you're supposed to bring all these new. I can't get with it. It don't make sense to me. And you can't explain it to where it does. So family, just be careful about this propaganda. Whenever you see, oh, he's the bad guy, just think about, wait a minute. Jonathan Sowell said that U.S. foreign policy is the same way they treat African Americans. And think about it. See, if a state-sponsored terrorist attacked me and I just let him do it, I'm a victim until the media get hold to, oh, he owed money to the library or some shit like that, and they're going to pay me out to be the bad guy. If the state-sponsored terrorists attack me and I shoot back and protect myself, now I'm the bad guy. So take that same vibration and put it over to Putin, to where he's been telling them for a minimum of a year, stop giving these guys weapons. They're neo-Nazis over there. These guys are attacking these Russian people in the Ukraine over here. I don't want you guys to put missiles right at my doorstep. Here's my proposal. They didn't tell us what Putin offered. Here's my proposal. Here's what we can do. Here's a compromise. They don't tell us none of that in American media or Western media, period. They tell you that in the other media. The Russian media tell you that. The Indian media tell you that. So just be careful when you hear this rah, rah, rah and make everything kind of seem, super simple, black and white, good and bad. It's never like that. It's people with agendas. So that's it. Propaganda versus perspective. This is Jonathan Sowell at jonathansowell.com. You can go to my website and you'll see more of these kinds of commentaries and I guess you call it stream of consciousness. I don't know, commentaries. And on the lighter side, I do comic book reviews, and I just got two Ethiopian from an Ethiopian publisher. From Ethiopian publisher. I got these two books. So I do comic book reviews because when I was younger, I used to read to my son's third grade elementary school class. And I tell you, it was one of the greatest little, just sitting there with the little kids in a circle and reading to them and talking to them. That meant the whole world. Some of them didn't have parents in the home, a father in particular. And so you could tell that they appreciated that energy, that male energy, that manly energy. They needed that. The boys needed it. The girls needed it. And of course, my little son was kind of proud. You know what I mean? So yeah. So I love you guys. Hope your dreams come true. Take care of yourself and your family. And don't get caught up in all this propaganda and stuff. Just ask yourself, who's benefiting from all this killing? And again, it's a lot of neo-Nazis in the Ukrainian military and police force, and they fucking people over. I know y'all heard about what they're doing to those African students. A lot of them is going to medical school. So I'm supposed, again, the rank and file Ukrainian person, they don't want no drama. They don't want no static. Nobody wants war. But you arming devils. And when you arm one side of a conflict, guess what you do? You prolong it. See, if we didn't give them no weapons, after a while, they're going to round the bullets, and guess what you got to do? You got to negotiate, and you bring the conflict to an end. But when you keep feeding them weapons, you stretch the conflict out. And I think what they want to do is cause Russia to fight a really long war and burn up a lot of resources and be fucked up. I think that's what they want. Now, if that's not evil, I don't know what is. Because Russia wasn't doing shit to none of us. There was even a couple of brothers over there who was living kind of nice over there. As long as you stay in the cities, stay out of the rural areas, you'll be all right in Russia. You know what I mean? Anyway, I love you guys. Hope your dreams come true. John the Soul, JohnTheSoul.com. Take care of yourselves. Peace and watch your back.